Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 196. So glad you could join me. An exciting episode today. We have our featured guest, one of the big friends of the show, Francesca Bell, is here with her new book, What Small Sound. We also have another one of our favorite poets, Wendy Videlock, will be here in just a moment to talk about her Poets Respond poem. And then last week was the Wrightwood Arts and Wine Festival, which includes the Wrightwood Poetry Slam. And at the I guess the hour and 15 mark or so after Francesca, we're going to have an appearance by the winner, Propaganda Poet, who has fascinated me from the moment I saw that name on the little bin to pull up of entrance, and ended up winning. So now we can learn a little bit more about who Propaganda Poet is, which should be pretty interesting. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry, and I know you do too. That's why you're here. So please do ring the bell, click the like button, leave reviews on iTunes or Spotify or Amazon Music. Anything you can do to give some feedback for the algorithms really helps poetry spread around and more people listen to this wonderful content that we have every week at the Rattlecast. So please do click something right now. There's only 3 likes right now on Facebook. There needs to be more. I mean, on YouTube. On Facebook, we got more than that. But please do click something because it actually helps, and people see it and show up, and you'll never know who might appear. Now, as I said, we're going to start off like we always do with our news poem for the week. And Wendy Videlock is here, one of our favorite poets, one of the most musical poets around. Here she is, Wendy. Hey, Wendy, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's been a bit, but you were the guest of Rattlecast around episode 70, I think, if anybody wants to go back. I'm not sure what number it is, but scroll down a ways, and Wendy will be there. But here we have a Poets Respond poem. And can you explain a little bit about what caught your eye about the story and why you decided to write about it?
Well, I've been trying not to read the news so much, and it's sort of not good. But it's also not good to be completely oblivious to what's going on in the world. And so I'm always trying to strike a balance. So I've been reading news sources that boast, publishing and reporting good news. And so I found this wonderful article about how, they're turning off the lights at the big arch in St. Louis. They just during May, and I think there's another month that they just turn the lights off so that the birds don't the birds get really messed up when we've got all the lights on at night. And they don't know how to use their instinct. The lights freak them out. And a whole lot of birds die during migration because of all our light pollution. So I started to think about that. And I'd been thinking about memento mori's, which is that little sign in those old paintings that, the painter would have this big, beautiful sort of still life of all this, overflowingly abundant food. And in the corner, there'll be this little skull or something just to remind us that, to remember that moment. And so, yeah, that's where the poem kind of came from, those two things. Of course, poets are death obsessed anyway, so
Yeah,
we
sure.
move into that direction pretty quickly here.
Yeah. Well, why don't you read it? Then we'll talk a little more about
All right.
how you wrote it. But let's hear it. Lights turn off.
Lights turn off in May at the Gateway Arch to assist migratory birds. It makes sense in every sense of the word to turn the lights off for the songbird, that she may find her way. True, too, for the waterfowl, the barn owl, the cactus wren. Even the mouse prefers a darkened house in which to nibble her grains. It's even true the fiddler's tune will only begin to dance when under a subtle crescent moon. If not for the dark, no spark, says the sparrow and the meadowlark. Beware the ones who fear the dark, who refuse to look a shadow in the eye, who have no interest in the sky unless it's rendered itself so blue it won't reveal the distance between it and you. It isn't the moral, but the heart of the story. The raven's claw, the falcon's beak, the eagle's scree, the rotting little memento mori. There is no wing, no blissful flight, no finding your way, no resting gently in the nest and nuzzling your little egg without the calling of the rest, the grief song, the suddenly wan, the fallen star, the weight of loss, the lights that flicker and turn off.
And that was Wendy Videlock once again reading Lights Turn Off in May at the Gateway Arch to Assist Migratory Birds. The title from a Good News Network article, and I just realized I forgot to include a link to that. So sorry, everybody. There should be a link to the Good News Network story, which I will add after the show. But that's one of the things, I've just, over the years, Poetry Responded has been going on for 9 years now. And over the years, at first it felt like a release for all the anxiety and tension that the news creates. But more and more it feels, I worry about it adding to the anxiety because it really, everything that we have, every industry has become like a way to make people addicted. Like that's the capitalist business model is to addict people to your product. And the news addicts you to negativity because we have that negativity bias and we get that, all those emotions that draw us to the TV or when something negative happens. And so it's sort of a race toward who can be the most negative at all times. I mentioned we had the Literary Festival or the Arts and Wine Festival, and ABC7 here did like a little spot for us. And as I was trying to find it so I could retweet, they did it on the air, but then they were going to post on social media too. So I was scrolling through all the lists of the articles, and it was shooting, toddler almost kidnapped, somebody, raped. It was just everything was terrible. And I was just waiting for us to get to, and come up to the festival to have some wine and enjoy some poetry and art, and it took so long waiting through that just mess to get to that article. So what do we do in the face of that? How do we make poetry a positive light? Because it is so important to release that anxiety, but we also want it to be like a shining light and to our humanity and to all the good things that humans do. So how do you go about approaching news? I mean, you have the dark turn there at the end, which is always something that poets tend to do too. So how do you navigate that as a poet?
Well, I think it all has to come together and, you can't have one without the other. But I think too, where we put our attention is how we live. I mean, that, I think social media is the only, industry whereby, the customers are called users. I mean, talk about addiction,
Mm-hmm.
they're not even pretending. They're not even pretending. And they also, when Facebook discovered that we spend more time on Facebook if we're angry, and then they changed it so that we weren't getting all the frustrating, angry stuff. And then they discovered that people actually spend more time if they're enjoying themselves. So, it's sort of like it's sort of like that whichever wolf you feed that's inside of you is the one that you're going to spend all your time, thinking about. But, you do get to a certain age where you're just sort of grateful to be alive and you don't expect the world to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And once we get there, then it's sort of like, okay, you do what you can in your own life to make everything a little bit better for the people around you and for yourself. And you just kind of keep that as your sort of guiding star. That really helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If everybody did that and focused on that, we'd all be better off, because you can help the people who are there to help. Yeah. Before you go, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Because I imagine, if we look at it's so driven by sound. Your ear for poetry is sort of legendary. And I imagine it comes through like just riffing on the sounds. So it makes sense in every sense of the word to turn off the lights for the songbird. Do you just sort of feel like the music of that? And then are you just like riffing off that like a jazz player? Because that's how I imagine it. That's how I want to pretend that you write.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like, Tim. And it always starts with some kind of line that just feels like it's like a song that you can't get out of your head. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly where it began. It doesn't always begin with that first line. Sometimes it's something that ends up somewhere else in the poem. But if I get something that starts ringing, and in this case it makes sense in every sense of the word. And then once I got that bird rhyme in there, then by then you just kind of know the poem is going to write itself because mm-hmm. the sound is where it all comes from for me. And so I just kind of have to get out of the way. Yeah. let the sound happen.
And then the flip side of that question is, how do you not let the sound take over to where, because the real beauty of your verse is the irregularity of it, because you sort of never know where to expect. There's always a sense of the verse rhythm, it feels very iambic, but there's always surprise going on how you turn around and where the rhymes actually come up and where the meter turns.
Yeah, if I can surprise myself, then it's good. If I start to feel that it's getting predictable, I just sort of get up and move around a little bit. And it's really like changing the energy.
Hmm.
And then once I do that, then maybe another line comes or another word. And a lot of times it's about parts of speech too. Like we get on this kick where all of a sudden we're all about the nouns are rhyming or the verbs are all rhyming. And you just have to kind of switch that around. And what happens is that when I do start to get carried away, and it does happen, I can see it as soon as I start to read the poem aloud to myself. And it's like, oh, now you're just being clever.
Hmm.
And it starts to feel more like it's the head rather than the body and the rhythm, kind of taking over.
Yeah, well, very cool to hear, and just always love your poems. An antidote to a lot of the other poems reading the negativity of the news. It was great to see. So thanks so much for sharing that, Wendy. Always a
Thanks so
pleasure.
much, Tim.
Yeah,
Always good to see you.
all right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, that was Wendy Videlock, Sunday's poet, with lights turn off in May at the Gateway Arch to assist migratory birds. And I will add that headline. The Good News Network is great. I mean, it's one of the things I follow on social media just to cleanse your palate. Kind of, it's like the like the ginger of the meal of social media or something. At least it pops up, and I'm a little happy. But anyway, check that out, and always great to have Wendy on. Now we're gonna take a quick break and go to our main guest, Francesca Bell, of course. So sit tight, and I will be right back. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Francesca Bell, a longtime poet in Rattle. One of the very first issues I read as a copy editor before I even had a job at Rattle was issue 22, which had Francesca's poem. I think it was Narrow Openings in that issue. Francesca was raised in Washington and Idaho and settled as an adult in California. She did not complete middle school, high school, or college and holds no degrees, which was beautifully rare among poets. She has worked as a massage therapist, a cleaning lady, a daycare worker, a nanny, a barista, and a server in the kitchen of a retirement home. Bell's writing appears in many magazines, including ELLE, the LA Review, New Ohio Review, and of course Rattle. Her translations appear in Mid-American Review and all over the place as well, including Rattle too. Her first book, Bright Stain, from Hen Press, was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award and the Julie Suk Award. In 2023, Red Hen has just published What Small Sound, her second book of poetry, which is beautiful. Look at this cover. Wonderful book. And Whoever Drowned Here is coming out too, a collection of poems by Max Sessner, which we'll probably have on a future episode, maybe a short segment to do some of our translations of Max. She's a translation editor of the Los Angeles Review and the Marin County Poet Laureate. Here she is, Francesca Bell. Hey, Francesca.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was looking at the last episode. It was episode 15, if anyone wants to go back and see that. And there was a fire, like, all over you remember? And you had your house was on the generator, and then the power came back on in the middle of the episode. And so I'm glad this time things seem a little more peaceful, and as far as the fires go anyway, right?
Yeah, it's only May.
Yeah. Well, why don't you start out with a poem from the new book?
Okay, well, this has to do with that. It was probably, well, this has to do with a different fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many.
There's so many. Learning to love the world that is. It's good to walk this first smokeless morning in weeks. Though fires burn not so far away, winds are favorable at the moment to me. I hum as I pass the 23 RVs of the unhoused lined up neatly along the road. A smattering of tents, the tarped and trailered boat someone lives in, as if it were a camp and not an encampment. I'm thinking of rain, which is not forecast, and hate, which definitely is, and a restaurant I loved that incinerated last week. The flight of steps to the entrance survived, And at the top hangs the missing space where we celebrated our 20th anniversary in style. Joggers pass me, and I notice how, though we cover our faces, we cannot paper over the losses of this strange year. Miserly world, I think, just as flock after flock of geese lift their generous bodies from the stinking slough and fly low over the trees I walk among. They are like a book God writes across this autumn sky, its pages fluttering. The very God who inscribes himself on the hill's dry faces, who etches suffering onto a world that scorches, its forests immolating and magnificent. So like the chef at Meadowood, who shattered dishes and people just before he plated beauty. I'm like a person who resists at first the temptation of a kiss, but then leans fully in, my heart rising on the voices of the geese, their cry a hinge that sings as it does the necessary work of opening.
Yeah, that was Learning to Love the World That Is, one of the early poems from What Small Sound, the beautiful new book from Francesca Bell. So, Francesca, your first book was about, I think we said, we characterized it as about all the things that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Or maybe are afraid to talk about. How would you characterize this book? Would it be something similar, or what's different about it than from the first?
Well, I think this book has less violence in it. The first book had quite a bit of violence in it. And this book, I guess I would characterize this book, the themes of it, as there's quite a bit about hearing loss and mental illness. My family's had a large struggle with mental illness, and about motherhood, both being a mother and having a mother. And then a lot about being a woman and sort of the peril of being a woman out in the world, and then the peril of trying to raise children, in the world that feels pretty scary a lot of the time.
Yeah. One of the things, we were talking just now about Wendy, about the negativity of the news and how poetry goes to those darker places very often. But I think it's because, poetry and just literature itself is a guide to the suffering of life. And life is suffering, ultimately. I mean, we all, everybody we love will die, and, there'll be heartache and there'll be challenging times no matter who you are. There's no way to guard against that. So we have to be prepared and strong and learn from each other's stories to make our way through life, because life is challenging. We have the knowledge of our own suffering, and we're the only creatures that can do that. And so we have poetry as an antidote to that. Is that what you get out of poetry? You're 2 books into a career, and you've been writing poetry for, I don't know how long. Is it the 20 years or so since I've known you, or even before that? What do you get over this span of time from writing poetry?
So I started writing poetry when I was, younger. I became somewhat serious about it when I was a teenager, but it was just sort of a long, very slow journey toward publication. And I think I get from it now what I used to get from it, which is also what I get from reading poetry, which is a way to feel less alone in the world and to experience a sense of intimacy with other people. Even when I'm writing the poetry, knowing that other people will read this and be moved by it, and maybe it will touch something in them or talk to them about something they've had a hard time with, or that they don't feel able to talk about. So I think intimacy is what I'm after, both when I read poetry and when I write poetry.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About the who is it? Was it Merwin who said, like, what would you do on the last day of the world? And he'd write a poem, or did he say plant a tree? I can't remember which. But
I don't remember either.
but there is something that I think I've only sort of started to think about recently, which is that you need to share poems in order for them to be effective in some way, or to work. Like we talk about the nature of poetry as psychologically healing, the James Pennebaker's work and the other psychological work as far as that goes, and how important it is to come to an understanding about your own inner thoughts and feelings. But there is some aspect in which we have to share it for it to work too. There's a way that you see yourself reflected through other people's eyes, and there's a way that everything is communal and that nothing makes sense without someone to have the poem written for, or to share with, and so I think, that question, would you write a poem if you were the last person on earth? Would you still do it? And for me, I think the answer is no, even as much as I like poetry and think it's valuable. But would you do that? Do you get something out of it even beyond the sharing?
I probably wouldn't write a poem on the last day of the earth. And for me, there is part of the gesture is the sharing. And I mean, I think there are different types of writing. When I write in my journal, I'm not wanting to share, and that can help me to understand what I'm going through. It can help me get in touch with feelings, maybe I'm avoiding. But when I'm writing a poem, definitely the sharing of it is that's part of the gesture for me. Yeah, so I would probably make really delicious food and eat on the last day. Yeah, wouldn't plant a tree and probably wouldn't write a poem. I might read a poem. Yeah, but for me, the part of the gesture is the sharing of it.
Yeah.
That's probably why I seek publication, because it's certainly possible to write a lot of poetry and never go through the agonies of seeking publication.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that publication in a minute, but let's hear another poem first. Let's hear Late Blooming, which is the next one on your list.
Okay, so I like to tell people that, I've led a very odd life. And in the course of my life, I've been both precocious as a young person, and then somehow I'm a late bloomer in the literary world. And so I've gotten to experience, both circumstances. Late blooming, mid-January, and still the last amaryllis refuses. Planted in October, it just now raises a green bud tip to the bright window. Inside the plain package waits a blaring red, the flower furled, held like breath in the trumpeter's body.
And that is Late Blooming, again from What Small Sound, Francesca Bell's newest book, or second, from Hen Press. So I think there is such a challenge in publishing, and there's such an old model that doesn't really make a lot of sense in a lot of ways, which is something I'm struggling with too. I don't know what to do with my own poems either. Like I've started writing for the last 3 years on the Rattlecast a poem a week. So now I have like 150 poems, but
That's a lot of poems.
Yeah, and they're all pretty good because I know what I'm doing, and so, but the thought of like submitting, I submitted a couple like in January, and then I never did it again. I thought, I'm going to start doing it again, but just there's something about the grind of that is so just disappointing, and it just feels so removed from the actual act of sharing poems and the act of writing poems. There's that aspect of just going through this sort of maze of journals and places you can publish things. How do you deal with that and still maintain sort of a positive outlook on the writing and the creation of books, or do you?
Well, I actually enjoy submitting to journals. I haven't written much the last few years, so I've submitted almost nothing for a few years. The pandemic really, I've had a lot of health problems, and it really knocked me off with my my writing habits. But that said, I really enjoy submitting. Even you get rejected a lot, and the way that I've gotten around that is when I'm writing a lot and when I'm submitting a lot, then I'll try to write one poem a week, and then send work out to 2 places every week. And so back when I was really really active, I had work out maybe at like 25 journals at a time, and I found that is what really helped me. If you have work out at 1 or 2 journals, or you're not creating new work, it gets pretty demoralizing. But if you've got work out at 25 journals and you get 1 rejection, I mean, there's still 24 places. And if you are submitting, 1 or 2 times every week, then you're keeping the work out there. And I find if I'm producing new work, I feel less demoralized. It was much harder to get a book accepted. That was a real slog. I spent 5 years sending my book out, and it was a finalist for some really great contests, and nobody took it. And it was expensive. I probably sent it to, I don't know, at least 100 places. And yeah, that was hard. Or not probably 100 different places. I sent it out about 100 times. You know, some places, like if I was a finalist, I would try again the next year.
Yeah.
That was far harder. You know, it's much harder to get a book accepted than to get your individual poems accepted. The other thing that I do is when I'm submitting to magazines, I always submit to places where I have a really good chance of getting in. And because I'm always hedging my bets and padding my cell so that against, you know, disappointment. And so I know some people will say, well, I only send, you know, to the best places. But for me, that's a bad strategy because, I mean, your odds at the best places are almost zero. And so I try to reach out to, you know, journals I know are likely to be friendly to my work. You know, journals for whom I might even be a little bit of a catch. And I try to send to those places, and then I have, you know, a tier above that, and then I have the pie in the sky places. So for me, over the years, it's always been a game of, you know, how can I keep myself from becoming too upset? And like I've almost never entered contests. I'm trying to change that, but the reason for that is because the odds of winning a contest are even smaller than the odds of getting into a journal. I mean, like when I was at River Styx, my first job was to screen 1,500 poems, and one poem was going to win. Those are not good odds.
No, they're definitely not. And so you enjoy that process still, then, I guess. So it's not discouraging to you know, to keep. I do remember, like in the olden days when it was by mail. And there was like a reason to be excited when like the post guy came, you know, and that was I kind of missed that aspect of it, but just being over email and my inbox is already a mess. So it's like, there's no joy in the online submissions, I guess, maybe is part of it too for me. So was there any, you know, between the first book and the second, was there any kind of, you know, difficulty in getting a start again? Like, well, you had all this, you know, years of poems built up and the momentum of writing and sending that manuscript out. Was there a transition phase where you're like, well, that's done, you know, almost like you have a child or something out in the world and you're sort of tired from all that and you don't want to, you know, get back to it again. Is there anything like that? Or did you feel comfortable to hop right into the second book?
You know, for me, I started putting the second book together when I was out on book tour with the first book. So I already had not all the poems written, but most of the poems that are in this book were already written at that point. And I went to Charleston, West Virginia, and read with Ace Bogus. And I had somewhere else to be maybe 2 days after that. So I had a bed and breakfast there, and I spread all the poems out, you know, in that room. And so I was already working on trying to figure out how to put the book together then. And I did write some, you know, newer work that did end up in the book, but I wasn't starting from nothing. You know, at that point, I had, I don't know, more than 100 poems that I actually liked at the time I was in West Virginia. And that, so I had to narrow them down. And then, I mean, I came back from my book tour. I kind of finished up like in December, and then the pandemic started. And so, yeah, so I've had a much harder time getting going post-pandemic. I know we're not really post-pandemic, but you know, what we call post-pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's hear another poem. Next up, what do we have? After the hearing test.
Okay.
Toward the end. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started losing my hearing when I was 24, and we're continuing with that pattern. So this is a poem about that experience. After the hearing test, it's 2 days before I cry. Grief sneaks up on me the way sound does now. My ability to mourn as sluggish as my inner ears. Cilia do not rejuvenate. We have that in common. I won't mind losing the clamor of cocktail parties, high grind of the dentist's drill, triggering retch of other people's vomit. But I'd like to keep Telemann's trumpet concerto in D, the tiny chuff my python makes up close to my ear, the calls of 2 Canada geese as they circled the slough this morning, seeming lost, their cries trailing them like a woman's heavy train, and the indecipherable murmur of my beloved's voice as she held my hand while the bear ate my baked beans just outside our tent. Though I could not make out her assurances, may they burble over me forever. Loss accrues, the geese can tell you. It compounds like interest. O world, leave me slowly. Let me dally over each diminishing return.
And that was after the hearing test. And sort of one of the central themes in What Small Sound, and where the title is derived from too, that What Small Sound being a poem from Rattle. And one interesting thing about this book is though those poems about the hearing loss are really moving, and I think it seems like somebody would maybe be driven to make that a central theme around a really thematic book. But what's interesting about this book is it moves around through time and topic in a way that almost feels, you're always surprised by what poem comes next, and it sort of has a sort of a random walk kind of quality to it as you move through this topic and then the mental health topics, and in a way that makes the experience sort of more lively than it would be if it were like, these are the poems about hearing loss, these are the poems about family illness and what we're dealing with in that, and things like that. So how did you decide to organize the book like that, which is not a way that books tend to be these days, I'd say?
Well, first of all, I seem incapable of writing a themed collection. I started out, when I started writing my poems about molesting priests, thinking I was going to make a whole book of it, and I just, I got about 5 poems in, and that was the extent of it. So I don't think I'll ever write a book that is just like that is all about one theme, and so I guess. I follow the advice of April Osman. She's a poet and also an editor, and she was the executive director of Alice James Books. And she has a wonderful essay about how to organize a book of poetry that it was in Poets and Writers several years ago. And she helped me put together my first book. And so I kind of follow a pattern that she does, where each poem has a little something to do with the poem before it. That could be the color blue, it could be a word in common, it could be a theme, but there's like a little thread that connects them. And so with this book, what happened for me is that I started with, I figured out, I kind of knew what the general themes were that were the strongest in the book. And then I found one poem that I thought touched on several of those themes. And so that was the poem I started the book with. And once I had the first poem, then it was much easier to sort of, to look for which poem had a little something in common. So like the first poem is called Jubilations, and it takes place partly at the restaurant Meadowood, which the second poem talks about when Meadowood burned down a few years ago. So that's the thing that they have in common. And so I think I like that way of arranging. I really struggled to know how to arrange a book. I don't have an MFA, so I didn't have anybody studying, or I didn't study that. No one was teaching me that.
Yeah, well, they don't really teach you anything in MFA, so don't worry about it.
I don't believe that,
but yeah, I do love. I mean, I love the way that it feels. It's sort of like, as you're moving through the book, it feels like a poem, just poems, and then the themes sort of slowly emerge, and you start to see more poems about this topic and this topic and this topic. There's sort of 3 that kind of swirl through the book, and you realize that they're all kind of coming together with a common, I don't know, perspective or something, which is really interesting to see emerge in a way that feels organic rather than being thematic. And so I really like that. And it too, like, I hadn't noticed the thread, but they do feel like they're talking to each other in a way. Like, it's almost like, because nothing happens in life that cleanly as like a theme, everything is always swirling around all at once. And so it, but you're still talking to each other, and the themes are interacting with each other too. So I think it's a great way to put together a book. I think it works really well. A lot of people love the last line of that poem. Let me dally over each diminishing return. And you do a great job with last lines. I always notice that. So let's talk about, the nitty gritty of poetry, but what's your writing process like, and how do you find a good last line? Because really you have a lot of good last lines throughout the book.
Well, thank you. I'm not supposed to admit this. And people always say you should never be writing toward the end of a poem. You should be surprised by it. But I often have the last line first. And that poem I did not. That poem I really struggled to come up with the ending. And almost until the book went to press, I don't remember now what it was, but it had a different ending that I just was never satisfied with. But I guess I tend to think about poems a lot in my head before I write them. And so I often have an idea of how I'm going to end, or I think that, I had a little bit of a background in gymnastics, and my sister she was a really wonderful competitive gymnast. And when you do gymnastics, even if you have flubbed everything, you always do, you have the finish. Yeah. And so, for me, I think the finish it's very important in a poem. Yeah. And I don't know, how do we know where these things come from? But it is the truth that I pretty often have the finish or very early, maybe even from the beginning for a lot of the poems.
Yeah, well, people talk about, needing surprise in a poem, but the surprise can be the journey too. Like, I think of some ways to write, which I've done a few times. Usually I don't, but if I do it that way, it feels like you're like hacking your way through the forest, and there's like paths, you don't know exactly, but you're getting to the top of the mountain. Like, you see like the tower at the top, and that's where you're going, even though you don't know the journey up the side of the mountain to get there. And then the surprise is the meanders and the path that you take, all the switchbacks and things to get to the end. So I think maybe that's how it works. Is that how it works for you? Knowing the ending first?
I don't know. It depends. I think that some people, I really do think a poem through, sometimes for a long time and sometimes pretty completely before I start to write. And so I think for me, the surprises might happen in my head before I'm writing something down. As I've gotten older, my memory isn't as good. So some of my poems now come more from free writing. And the free writing I can be surprised in the free writing. Like, I'll be going along, and if I can really relax into the free writing, I might end up writing about something I had no idea I was even thinking about. So I think it probably depends on a person's on kind of their methods. And I think too, like, for so long, I have 3 kids, and while raising kids, I often didn't have much time that was mine, or that was quiet time. So I might be turning over an idea or a poem in my head for a long time before I ever had a chance to write it down. And luckily the kids are grown now that my memory is not as sharp.
That's nice that it works out that way. So what goes into a good ending? Like, what do you think makes the landing stick like that? Is there some characteristic that it has that you've noticed?
I don't know, I don't remember who it was who said that about, it was one of the big congressional arguments about pornography, and that you just know it when you see it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I don't know how to say what makes the best ending, or what makes an ending good. But you feel it. I mean, you really feel whether the gymnast has landed the ending or not, at the end of a poem. But I don't know. Do you know what makes the ending good?
I don't know. I would say the same thing. There's a way that it like completes the music, There's a way that it like, if you, like, I don't know anything about music, actually. Like literally, I don't know. I'm terrible. There's a guitar over there, but I'm terrible at it. And, but you can hear which note you're supposed to end on anyway. I don't even know what that is, but there's still, like, if you're going through a chord progression, there's like a certain note in that chord progression that like is right. And I don't know. And somehow I think it's math. Like, I think it adds up to balance out the wave sound or something. And there's something like that goes on with the feeling of a poem too, or the thought of a poem, where if, there's a way that it ends, and either you end in a sort of unbalanced way that you want to end, or like in a perfectly balanced way. And there's sort of 2 options for an ending, but there's something about that like, either it's like, like you end, off key or the opposite, or on key or the opposite, or there's something like that goes on, and you can definitely hear it. And so a lot of times we have a poem where we love everything until the last line, and the line just didn't do it. And you're like, oh, just the last, find the last line and send it back. But you can definitely hear it. So I'd say pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like I often feel like poems, I've been criticized for this thought, but that poems, like, it's almost like they're writing themselves in my body. And there's something about when you finish the motion. And that's what it is like with gymnastics or with ballet. I did ballet that, you don't just, you finish and then you just stop. I mean, there's a flourish or a gesture. So I guess I think that a good ending has a gesture. And I think some good endings do sort of drop you off a cliff. And some good endings maybe tie something up. But there's a definite gesture at the end of a poem if the ending works. And if the ending doesn't work, the poem it's not done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's an object. Like a poem is an actual object, and to not have the last bolt on it all falls apart or something too.
No, it's true. It's true. Yeah, and it is. There's something horrible about reading along and loving a poem, and then you get to the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, that's so in reading submissions that happens so much, and I'm sure you had that reading submissions for River Styx and other places too. Yeah. And
I'm reading for Body right now as a guest editor, and that is, even if something lags a little in the middle, if the ending is good enough, I can live with the lag in the middle. But boy, if the ending's, I don't know, it's just too dissatisfying.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to talk more about that, about editing in a little bit, but let's do another poem because we haven't. I want to make sure we get through a good number of them.
Okay, so I was a massage therapist, as you mentioned in my bio, for 4.5 years. And I've always wanted to write more poems about it, but there are 2 poems about being a massage therapist in this book, and this is one. And it's important to know for this poem that onions are a crop that they winter over. So, most crops we plant in the spring and we harvest in the fall, but onions, they stay out all winter under the ground. I leave my window open now to hear them. Nights, I hear barn owls calling, shrill as hunger stripped bare, and think of the onion farmer from east of the mountains, his broad, exhausted body on my massage table. The owl, he told me, screamed all winter from his barn rafters. He said the sound made the cold colder when he trudged from field to barn to house. After I touched all the places I was licensed to, bunched tender shoulders that crept toward his ears, beat up hands, leathery as a dog's paw pads, each buttock's lonely hillock giving gently beneath my forearms strokes. He sat up and asked if I'd have sex with him. He promised not to hurt me, to buy me dinner after. He said it plain, did not look away. But I was 20 and knew nothing of desolation or owls or wintering over onions, or of a farmer pacing ugly acres as layer upon layer of stinging, weeping sweetness forms beneath the frozen solid ground.
Yeah, that was a very touching poem, very empathetic, and a topic that's doesn't usually have a lot of empathy to go along with it. I leave my window open now to hear them. Yeah, and it kind of almost ties in maybe to what I wanted to ask about your time editing journals. I wonder, is there a difference? Because you edited your reading submissions for River Styx, I think maybe 5 years ago or so, if I remember right, roughly.
Yeah, maybe 6 or so.
Yeah, something like that. And then now Body. Have you noticed a change in the submissions? Is there anything different in what the kind of poems people are writing? Because it's interesting. It's hard for me to know because there's that like boiling frog thing where it's just so gradual that I can't tell what the difference is almost because I'm reading poems every day. But to have a 5 or 6 year gap or whatever that was, have you noticed something leaving that part of a job and then coming back to it? Anything that's changed?
I don't think so. To be honest, I think people are still making the same mistakes. I mean, the big mistake, I'm sure you must get this a lot, is not knowing the journal. And, like I recently, for Body, someone submitted, it was like science fiction fantasy. And that's something that magazine would never publish. And at River Styx, I got things that were just, very basic rhyming poems, and which was not something that River Styx would have published. They would have published some formal work, but this was very like roses are red, violets are blue kind of a style. And so I think I still see a lack of research in a lot of the submissions. I don't think. Yeah, I don't notice the difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I was wondering about is it started to occur to me reading submissions just like last week that poets seem to be a little more safe than they used to be. And that poem, the poem you just read is very unsafe kind of because it's empathizing with somebody who you should be disgusted with, and would rightly so, and imagining, what is their life must be like. To ask you to do that is something that doesn't, that isn't, would maybe be distasteful or something like that. And I think there's a lot more, it felt to me a lot more risk taking in how a poem will be received than there is now. And I wonder if that's just my imagination or if that's something you might have noticed too.
Well, you have to remember that people are sending things to me.
I guess that's true.
Yeah. And so, boy, there's been a lot of risk taking. Lot of risk taking. Yeah. So that, but I guess actually the one thing that is radically different is, and I hope I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm sort of gray listed anyway already. So what the hell? But it's been fascinating to me that a lot of people are reporting almost like a medical history. Do you get that in the bios?
Yeah, I do.
And it's interesting. We've really become, as the literary world has really become very invested in all sorts of various identities, and I can see some value in that, but I think like people, I've been told about asthma this time around, and I don't know. So that's really different. And when I was at River Styx, a lot of people didn't even write. They didn't even write a cover letter. I was really disappointed because I love letters and I love cover letters. But this time, there's almost always some kind of cover letter and a bio, and it very, very often begins with so and so. And then it goes on to this string of identity markers, and that's different. And
yeah, that's the kind of thing. Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about because it feels like people don't feel like they have permission to write about anything that's not within their identity circle anymore. And so leaping out and having a different perspective that's not theirs seems to completely be gone almost. And so the reason for those cover letters seems like it's to say, like, I have permission to write this poem because it's about me. And that kind of is the sense that I get. And so in the letters and in the notes, there'll be, explanations for why I can write the poems, almost like preempting the thought that you don't have permission to write. That's what I mean by safe. It's like, it's cautiously about the topics that we're writing about.
Oh, I guess I've interpreted it a little bit differently. I've thought it was in part a way of wanting to let an editor know that if they take your work, they're checking a box, an identity box. So I hadn't thought about it as they're trying to qualify themselves for the poems they're writing. I actually have tried to quit reading the cover letters and the bios because I don't want them to influence my what I like or don't like. Yeah, I hadn't thought of them in that way.
Yeah.
But I do think that people are wanting to be they're wanting to be looked at and judged based on, whatever their identity is, whatever they feel their identity is. But I hadn't thought about it. I'm gonna look at that when I go back to the work, because I'm still not done with the reading. I hadn't thought about it, that they're trying to say it's okay for them to write about a particular topic.
Yeah, and another thing I've had too is more people are pseudonyms. Like, I'm sending this poem, and it's not my real name, and I think there was a lot more of, like, just thinking about like 10 or 20 years ago, there's a lot more of like, yeah, I'll say that. Like, I don't care what you think. This is what I'm going to write about. And now it's kind of like just stepping in very cautiously about the topics that we're choosing to share and analyze and explore.
Yeah, I find that really, honestly, almost tragic.
Yeah, I do too. And that's why, I was wondering if, the carefulness is sort of losing some of the artistic daring or something. And that's going on. And thinking too about how I think that's going to happen more and more as AI starts to write poems, and so we're going to have a death of the author thing, where the author matters so much more even than sort of the persona that we're building as writers, but just the idea of having a personal connection with the authors will matter so much, because you can have a poem, AI fake a poem, and so it's going to be really so much more about the author, and so then the authors have to be even more cautious. And I wonder if we're slipping sort of down into something where we can't really explore things that surprise us anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's something I'm working on for myself, because as I'm kind of starting to write again after this long, health-driven hiatus. And I really don't want to be cautious, because I just think it's the enemy of good writing, caution. I mean, I sincerely believe that, and I don't think that good writing means that you don't offend anyone. I think that very often in good writing you do offend people, because you cause them to think about things that are uncomfortable for them. And so, for myself, something that I've realized is that I have to one, I can't be on social media as much. And two, I have to understand that social media is really a make-believe world. And that I have my life, whether or not I'm gray listed, or, people hate me, or people think I'm a jerk who've never met me, or, or people think that, I don't have the right to write persona poems, or that I'm not disgusted by the man who asked me to have sex with him, when I was a massage therapist. I have deep empathy. I mean, I probably worked on about 1,000 people, and people's bodies are really lonely. And sometimes that's channeled through a sexual urge, but it's also just a deep physical loneliness. We are not meant to live the way that we live, as physically distant from one another as we do. So it's something that I'm really working on, and I hope that other writers will work on. Is not allowing the thought police to live in your head.
Well, I don't know if it's something you have to work on, because your whole, au revoir of poetry has been, challenging yourself to push into the things that you might not want to confront otherwise, maybe is the way to put it.
Actually, I've never challenged myself. Those are just the things I like to write about.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's like the topics that you're drawn toward are the things that maybe other people be afraid to talk about.
Yeah, but I do think that I think that I had a very hard time right around the time of the pandemic, but before it started, with all the vitriol online, and I really did feel like I was becoming very afraid, and afraid of being canceled, afraid of this or that. I had there were complaints against me when I appeared at a college campus, and somebody tried to get a reading I was giving canceled, and I was becoming afraid, and I think during this time when I've been more distant from certainly the online world and the writing world, it's been really good for me, and I feel ready to write whatever I want to again, and yeah. I won't tell you my rallying cry.
Okay, well, I can, obviously I can relate. This has been canceled several times myself.
Yeah, yeah.
And it
And
does.
you've had it much worse than I have, but I've been pained to watch what you've been through.
Yeah, well, it's just part of the, anybody is a target who sticks their head up and does anything publicly, really. And there's something that goes on in social media, which is a really ancient, sort of drive to kick people out of the tribe and then force them to sort of beg not to be kicked out. And there's this whole psychological drowning thing that goes on that's being exploited by social media for the last, 15 years or so, or however long it's been going on. And, but if you just ignore it, you can just ignore it and keep going and it's fine. Is the thing people don't realize, I think. So, I don't know. It's a strange world to live in.
I found that when you're not looking at it, you realize it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really doesn't. It's an illusion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those people that are, like coming after you online, they're not part of my life. I don't need them for anything. They don't know me. They've never met me. It's an interesting time to be alive. I very strongly dislike that aspect of it. And I find it so odd that it's in the writing community. Writers used to be the ones that were fighting against censorship and were fighting for risk-taking. Mm-hmm. And now, so many writers are obsessed with not giving offense. And that's not my mission.
Yeah.
So
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's definitely obvious reading your books, which is what makes them so strong. So let's hear another poem before we get too far down into that rabbit hole.
Okay. Endometrial biopsy. All this time, the pain of your leaving lodged in my tissues like a landmine. Today, tripped by the doctor's needle, it imploded in concussive waves. Afterward, weeping, waiting to numb up in the humiliation of the stirrups, I remembered our trip to Planned Parenthood. Having not deflowered me, but rather opened me, petal by petal to the goodness to come, you held my hand for the exam. When I was fully splayed, the doctor asked, "Did you want to see?" And you took one look at the place where possibility would one day enter and reality come squalling out and fainted away. She rushed to bring you back, while I lay cranked wide on the table, the flushed blank face of my cervix staring. Smelling salts brought you right around, but you never really returned, enlisting a few weeks later, leaving me waiting 23 years to find what grief implanted in my body's hushed, brooding corridors.
And that was Endometrial Biopsy. Again, we're reading poems from Francesca Bell's newest book, What Small Sound. And before we move on to a different topic, just let me say, you should come back to social media because it has changed in the last a few years. I think we've turned a corner and people are just tired of that stuff. And you just block the dopamine chasing rabble rousers and they just disappear. And so,
I've kind of inched back. I'm on Instagram has always been okay for me because it's more based on images. Mm-hmm. And I'm on Facebook and I post things on there. I haven't yet gotten to where I feel safe enough to scroll, but I'm getting there. Getting there.
Well, it is. I think we've turned some tide. I think maybe because, the art world was like one of the first in. We're sort of like the first out the other side of the tunnel, and people are a little bit just tired of all that and, the nonsense that comes along with it. So maybe I like to keep thinking that anyway, that the sort of performative outrage era is sort of slowly coming to an end, and we're getting more real, I think, maybe, hopefully. But anyway, I want to talk more about your writing process and how your poems come to be, because they're such beautiful poems. How do you mentioned writing toward an ending very often, but how do you know what you want to write about in the first place? Is there something that you sense that like this is a topic I want to discuss, or are you the kind of writer who journals and things surprise you and then you sort of take it off and become a poem? What is your process of like forming the poem in the first place?
Usually it will start with something that just sort of grabs my attention. and I always feel like, the like a dog, and it's like squirrel. And so something will grab my attention, and it will be usually, two things that are somehow related in a weird way. And often I can, obviously you can see, and I'm preoccupied with topics that I'm looking at through different, lenses. Because there are several poems in this book that have to do with mass shootings, but I've approached them in different ways, and so often there will be something that just kind of grabs me, and then my mind will start to turn it over, and sometimes if it's a good enough thing, then it kind of will just unfold. So that's one possibility, and the other is. Well, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of Poets Respond, because when I read the news, I'm always kind of looking, for what might become a Poets Respond poem. So I should thank you for that. And the news is a wonderful thing, because often you can write about something that is like that obsesses you, but you can do it through someone else's story, and so I like to do that a lot. And then and then really the free writing, that can either with or without a prompt, that can be really useful. I've tried to do that thing. What's that? I can't remember that book. The Artist's Way, where you do the morning pages. I'm probably like at about a 50% compliance rate over the course of any time I try to be at 100%. But if I write first thing in the morning, before anyone's up, often if I'm just writing, then a poem will kind of take shape within the body of the free write, and then it's just sort of like excavation work. So those are ways that the poems often come about. And sometimes I'll have a topic that I'd really like to write about, and but I haven't quite found a way in, and so then my mind is always just kind of in the background watching. Yeah, I think Stephen King refers to it as like you see something and it somehow relates to something else in a weird way, and then he says like yowza, and I have the yowza method.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've always thought of a haiku as like the fundamental unit of poetry. And that's really what a haiku is, are these two things, finding two things that relate in some way you don't quite understand, and you're reaching for it, but then you make that connection. And that's how that tends to work. And so having that be the impetus for a lot of creativity really makes a lot of sense. There are, let's see, I want to get through all three of the poems you have left. So let's do Taking Your Place. And if anybody has any questions for Francesca, please leave them in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. I'm keeping an eye on both. But let's hear the next poem.
Okay. Taking Your Place. After they locked you in the famous hospital, I scoured your shut-up rooms on my hands and knees. Nights I lay on your bathroom floor, tiles gleaming in the dark, your mad clutter cleared away. You'd read online it's possible to hang yourself without leaving the ground, brought a pillow for your head, a comfort measure. I tried to fit my body where I would have found yours, slender neck belted with the leather strap. When the nurses didn't watch you overnight, I called the hospital to complain. The director sighed and spoke slowly as to a dim child. He said, a determined person will kill herself no matter what we do. Since they sent you home, I keep on checking. Is the laundry dry? Do we need more sugar? Are you alive? Day by day, I creep, pain scuttled, laid flat as by a deer who's crushed her shape permanently into grass. I've learned to wait, but though you returned, I do not think I'm coming back.
Yeah, that's Taking Your Place. A very hard poem for a very hard time from What Small Sound. And do you writing a poem like that, and then sharing it, what is it that what you get from that? Is it your own sense of healing through that difficult time? or is it trying to help people who might be going through a similar thing? What is it that what is your intention when you tackle a poem on a topic like that?
Well, I think so. There are several poems about my daughter's a very intense time of my daughter's illness in this book, and the impetus for writing them was like it's almost like having a splinter and wanting to get it out. And the impetus for publishing them is because I think that we really don't talk enough about mental illness, and in particular, we don't talk about severe mental illness nearly enough. And so when you have family members that have severe mental illness, it's very isolating, and it scares people. People don't really want to hear about it. Like people or they maybe say kind of unhelpful things, and so in a really fundamental way, I try to talk a lot about mental illness, and I feel grateful. My daughter, kind of during this time, she came to me, and I don't know if she read my mind or read my journal, or I'm sure she didn't read my journal, but she said, Mom, if you want to write about my illness and publish it, you can. Mm-hmm. She told me 2 separate times, and it was very helpful because I was feeling really like I didn't want to let it out, because her illness is really her story. And so I've tried to write the story that is my story, which is being a mother to someone who has a severe mental illness. Mm-hmm. And I think that we really don't. We talk now about, oh, I'm so OCD, or oh, I'm kind of depressed, but for most people, they won't have that much experience with the more severe end of those spectrums.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we did that tribute to mental illness, which we interviewed you for back in 3-4 years ago or something. Yeah. And when I worked as a counselor at a group home, it was just the people they had severe issues. Mostly they were dealing with schizophrenia, but also borderline personality disorder and other things like that, bipolar disorder. And they were just put away in these sort of like halfway houses where, they lived in a group and they were counselors, but their families didn't participate much. And even the neighborhood didn't know what was really the issue going on there. And it's just such a slip it under the rug thing. So it's so important to talk about those topics. So I'm glad you're doing it. It feels like all the topics you are interested in are things that are taboo but shouldn't be. Maybe that's a good way to think about it. Like problems we have to address that we're not talking about in an honest way. But do you think that that's what you're drawn to in poetry, and poetry is a tool for excavating that?
Definitely. And I think that I'm that kind of person in general. Like I always tell people, like if there's going to be a Q&A, that they should be sure they want to know the answer and what I actually think before they ask me a question. Mm-hmm. Because I think in general, I'm a person who I don't really like small talk or talking around things. I really like to go to the heart of a subject. Yeah. So I've always been like that. Not always comfortable for the people around me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's definitely what I'm interested in poetry is talking about the things that otherwise we don't talk about.
Yeah, it's one of those things where poetry and comedy have that in common, and so it's interesting.
I love stand-up comedy too.
Yeah, there's so much in common between the two.
They're even harder hit than poets right now with all of the offense people take about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. And if we can't laugh, I mean, I don't know, what are we really? But let's hear. We have 2 more poems up. I want to do both. Let's do the penultimate poem now.
Okay. Like a friend, you are hung safely in the past now, fixed in the frame of the photograph from that day in the mountains when I was afraid, but you went right in, trusting your body to the body of the lake, its coldness that held you even as the bottom dropped away. I'd like to remember you floating in the green world of the water, the heavens broken open like a vault above us, and summer pouring through. How you waved from the other side, elegant and straight, slender as an exclamation point. Last week, after life curdled inside you, like milk gone slowly, irrevocably sour, they found you suspended in the dark of the winter park. I'd like to imagine you peaceful, your fall caught by a snare you shaped yourself, pausing a moment between one world and the next, feet lightly brushing the ground, your body a shore you'd already pushed off from. I'd like to think of your hair, shining white as bone in the moonlight, as the tree stood unbending in its mercy, and the end of your life rushed up like a friend to greet you.
Yeah, another one of those ending with a flourish that sticks the landing, like a friend from What Small Sound. We haven't really talked about the hearing loss yet, which is a central aspect of the book. There's something really interesting about, a poet having hearing loss, and same like Beethoven having hearing loss is an issue, because the poetry is the music of speech and the sounds. What is the prognosis on that, and how does it relate to poetry as you move through poetry? Is there a way that it's affecting the way you write?
So that my prognosis, thank goodness, is good. My mother lost she really basically lost all of her hearing by the time she died. And so when I started to lose my hearing when I was 24, I was worried about that. And I do a lot of my writing out loud. I say things over and over and read them over and over to myself. And much of my revision happens that way. And I was really scared about that at first. But I don't seem to have, she had 3 different things wrong with her ears, and I just seem to have developed one. And so they don't expect me to become as deaf as she did.
Mm-hmm.
So my prognosis is good. And, I'm not sure that my hearing loss has affected my writing that much. Other than the thing that it affects weirdly is it's very easy for me to withdraw. Because I have hearing aids now, but I should have probably gotten them about 10 years earlier, but I kept avoiding going to the audiologist. And I noticed that I was just more and more staying in my own head. And I could hear sound was happening, but I couldn't understand what people were saying. And so like in my house, people would be talking over here, and I would just be, like doing my kitchen work or whatever I happen to be doing. And I finally got the hearing aids because I was beginning to scare myself, because I have a tendency to become quite depressed. And so I could feel that was where this was headed. But so far, I don't think I haven't noticed it changing the way I work. And I'm able to still, hear well enough, particularly with my hearing aids, that I can still use sound to guide the writing.
Mm-hmm.
I was really scared when it first started because my mom started losing her hearing when she was in her early 20s, and she really was very impaired, even by the time she was my age. I'm 56. And then by the time she died, she couldn't hear music anymore, which that really terrified me too, not being able to hear music. But thankfully, I don't think I'm going to face that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there I don't know, there's some kind of, central metaphor too in the book to losing hearing, to poetry itself. Have you thought about that? Is that something that you're consciously thinking of as you guide the book? Was that a metaphor for something?
No. When I write, I just write poem by poem, and line by line. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one, I can't remember, I wish I could pull it up. There was one line in a poem that made me think about, I guess it takes me back to Eric Campbell's book, Arguments for Stillness, too. That the I don't know, the quietness, the quietness that poetry provides is something that's going on there as well. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish I could tell you that I had planned it all out, brilliantly, but I didn't. Yeah. But I think that's something that is interesting when you put together a book like I hadn't realized that I was writing things that would even fit together into a book.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first approached April Osman to ask her if she thought I had a book before my first book, and I just didn't think any of my poems really had much to do with each other. And she said, "Actually, you're one of the most obsessive poets I've ever met." Yeah, so I don't know. I think often we're the last to know.
Yeah, it's like the subconscious churning, I wish I could find back in that line, but there's some line about it. And it made me think about the way that, it takes me back to Lester Graves Lennon when I interviewed him, was talking about how he doesn't want to add to the noise of the world,
Oh,
And there's a sense
I
of,
know what you're talking
yeah.
about. Just a second.
Yeah, and there's a sense of that poetry does, like turn down the noise so you can hear the actual, something individually, because we're swirling in this sort of maelstrom of thoughts and ideas, and then poetry sort of has a quietness that brings focus. And so I was thinking about that as a sort of overarching metaphor for the book.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about, and we could swap this one out if you want for the poem I was intending to read. On page 94, there's the poem Hush. And I think that might be what you're thinking about.
Yeah, why don't we there's time, they're both kind of short. Let's do that poem and the one about your mom, if you don't mind, because I wanted to get to that one too, because that's such a great poem to end on. So, but this is short. Let's do this one as well.
Okay, I think this is what you're remembering. Hush. Evenings, sick of acuity and its cost, I pull at my hearing aids until what entered each ear slides slowly out, drawing sound along with it. Deafness a relief, as when I've had all I can take of pleasure and push my lover from my body. The world, it's true, is less, absent the part of him that fills and empties me at once. Ecstasy and overwhelm, like life's din played by the devices in my head. Insistent music, I finally writhe away from.
Yeah, that's the one. That's Hush from What Small Sound,
Yeah.
and that's what made me think of that. Is poetry is doing that, So yeah, I'm glad you read that one. But let's close out with the other poem too, which is one of my favorite poems in the book.
Thank you. So this one is one I actually wrote this poem when I was really young, like I don't know, maybe 20 or 21. And people always thought it was an elegy for my mom, but it wasn't. And then a couple of months ago, I guess almost 3 months ago now, she died. Making you noise for my mother. The day before you go deaf completely, I will make you noise. I will bring birds, bracelets, chimes to hang in wind. We will drive from Idaho to Washington again, and I will read to keep you awake. I will tap little poems on the backs of your arms and neck to be sure you hear me. I will play spoons on your body in restaurants, smack my lips, heave you sighs, each one deeper than the last. We will finally shout. And then, as quiet slips in, settling over, I will speak. I will keep speaking. I will sing you nonsense songs until you sleep.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful poem, Making You Noise, from What Small Sound by Francesca Bell. Always such a pleasure to do anything with you, Francesca. So glad you could be a guest and share your new book with us. And yeah, just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to do anything with you and Rattle. And just all poets should be so grateful for all that you do and Rattle for poets and for poetry. You're an incredibly generous editor.
Well, thanks so much for saying that. I appreciate it. But I just...
Oh, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate having, authentic people and getting to hear their voices and what people actually think and the strange and interesting ways that people are in their heads. It's just fascinating. And so I love anytime we come across like a genuine, honest poet, I just love it. That's what I'm here for. So thanks for being here, Francesca.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Okay, thanks. You too.
Okay. That was Francesca Bell. Her newest book is What Small Sound. You can find Francesca's work at francescabellpoet.com. It's spelled like you see. Oh, let me put it on the screen. It's spelled like you see it on the screen here. Francesca Bell, SCA Bell, poet.com for both of Francesca's books. Oops, that's a little weird. So a propaganda poet was supposed to be here. Let me check my email to see if he sent me a note. He hasn't, so I'm not sure. So maybe he'll pop in the open lines. But either way, let's go to open lines. And now the prompt for this week was to write a poem about a cultural myth you no longer believe in. So if you have any of those poems about that, if you have news poems, if you have something you've written recently, if you had something you'd like to written recently and would just like to share, feel free to share anything you'd like. Here's how it works. Email your poem first to openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com, and then I'm going to put the Zoom link into the 2 chat windows on Facebook and YouTube, and find them there, follow the link, but only if you'd like to share poems. If you just want to sit back and listen and enjoy the open lines, stay right where you are, because it's best viewed on YouTube and Facebook, where you can see the poems too. But if you want to share one, come on over to the Zoom for a little bit and share a poem. We have about an hour usually to go by. So there you go on YouTube, and here you go on Facebook. And Propaganda Poet is coming in too. So we'll go to a quick break, and then we will go to Propaganda Poet and the open lines. So sit tight, and I'll be right back with much more poetry. And we're back. Thanks, everybody, for waiting around. We have a special guest tonight. The last week, as I mentioned, was the Wrightwood Poetry Slam, part of the Wrightwood Arts and Wine Festival. It's the 6th iteration of it. We had a wonderful time. Joaquin Zihuatanejo, the Grand Slam champion, HBO Deaf Poet, was here teaching a class and then performing too at the festival. We had, I think, 20 poets enter the slam. Some of them were students of the class that we did, that Joaquin did, and some of them were not and bought in for $10. And one of those was Propaganda Poet, who won the poetry slam. And here he is, Propaganda Poet. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm
How
good.
Are you all?
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So I was fascinated by you when you signed up as Propaganda Poet. I was like, who is this and what is a Propaganda Poet all about? But then also in your first poem, you mentioned having been a teacher for Joaquin. And so tell me about a little about who you are, because we have no idea. Everybody who was in the Poetry Slam has no idea either. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of like that. I move in and out, and I like to be mysterious. I don't know why I pretend to be. I'm not. But anyway, I'm a teacher. I'm a writer. I'm a nerd. I'm a hippie. I believe that we should all just get along and move forward and stop this silliness that is the human race. That pretty much is all of it in a nutshell. You know, social justice humanist and go ahead, sir.
Yeah, how long have you been doing Poetry Slam? Is that something? It seemed like you were a veteran, that you knew that your way around the stage.
Yes. Well, I've been on stage since I was like 6 years old. I'm a performer. I'm a musician, actor, theater kid, poet, writer. I actually got my English degree on accident. Well, I changed my major like 3 or 4 times, and finally my um, they call that thing. He's not a tutor. He's your counselor. Finally, my counselor was like, you're like a year and a half away from an English degree. I was like, really? It's like, yeah, you keep taking all these writing and lit classes. You might as well just do that. I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'll do that. As far as how long I've been doing slam, I think I've been doing it longer than I even realized it was slam, because it's kind of the type of poetry I always did. I was really lucky. I'm old. So I went to school before a civics class became a GOP threat. And I had a really amazing senior social survey teacher. And so, I mean, we were 15, 16, 17 years old, and we were reading Johnny Got His Gun and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Miseducation of the Negro. And it was just like, my whole world just blew up. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? I'm going to do more than just write songs about chicks, because like there's more going on in the world than that. And so I started out in theater, and I started out as a musician. So when I started doing poetry, it was just kind of already there. And then I had a few teachers along the way who would tell me, what you do isn't poetry. And then I had that one teacher, because it's always that one, and everyone here knows exactly what I mean. I had that one teacher who was like, have you ever heard of Poetry Slam? I was like, no. He's like, oh, well, let me introduce you to some things. And then after that, I hit the circuit, and I was really lucky and fortunate to be in the right place at the right time a whole lot of times. So, I mean, I performed with Saul Williams early on. I performed with Talam Macy early on. I was with the San Diego Slam team back in like '02. I was a runner-up on the Orange County Slam team, on one of the LA Slam teams. Mm-hmm. And they were all coming out of Pomona, Mike and Dim Lights. For those of you who have never heard of Mike and Dim Lights, it was running out of Pomona for like a good 20 years, and they're in LA now. And they're an amazing open mic. Like, they're on IG, they're on Facebook, check them out. Mike and Dim Lights. They are phenomenal, and it's where I cut most of my teeth, mm-hmm. and where I met most of the amazing people I met.
And one last question before, and we'll have you do a poem. What is it that you recommend? What have you learned that's like one takeaway for performing a poem well? Like, how do you get to, using your voice to engage with an audience? Is there some secret to it that you can pass along?
Really, the best advice I ever got was from just all the other poets that I, have performed with. They all pretty much, to sum it up in some words, they all say something to the effect of, write it like you mean it and read it like you wrote it. Mm-hmm. And it really just comes to like, honor the fact that we have been given a gift for a reason. And people who come to embrace that and understand and respect that, then will understand that not only do we have a mission and a duty with this voice, but once you use it, you get people's attention the way you use it. I was in a band with an ex who said, people don't just come to hear you, they come to see you too. And you have to keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. So just whenever you live performance, just think about what you thought was the cool, as far as like a teacher. I just take all the cool things from all the cool teachers I ever saw, and I wrap it into one. Uh-huh. It's the same thing. Like, every performance you've ever seen, just take it and wrap it into one and just go. But mean it. Mm-hmm. Because there are people who are listening to you who it really does mean something to them. So
yeah. Well, great advice for all poets appearing as guests on the open lines here. Why don't you hit us with a poem here?
Okay. Do you specifically want one from the slam, or can I do something different for you?
Anything you want, whatever you want to do.
Okay, I'm going to do something from my new book, Word Tornadoes, that I don't do very often. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I randomly picked this one. This is one of my less slam pieces, but this is one of my favorites. This is called Seeing Beauty in Person. If beauty were a person, she would exist within infernos, the fiery passions of volcanic flows scorching the skies of Mercury. If beauty were a person, she would be clouded in mystery, a necessary protection from predators who seek to prey upon her inner Venus heat. If beauty were a person, she would soar aloft as free as falcon flights, adrift on endless wind currents, caressing the clouds of earth. If beauty were a person, she would walk statuesque, solid mountain giant across vast moonscapes and valleys rivaling those of Mars. If beauty were a person, she would loom larger than all, draped in gaseous forms that keep her veiled from the naked eye, released only in storms that ravage Jupiter's hidden landscape. If beauty were a person, she would never have need for the rings of men. Her radiance would overcome their gravity, encircling the entirety of any Saturn. If beauty were a person, her orbits would criss and cross without any type of loss, gaining only the courage and certainty of the planetary twins, Uranus and Neptune. If beauty were a person, there would be no debate. Frigid, frozen fears would be dwarfed by her ability to be seen, no matter what any others may deem what she should be. Planetary, plutonic, or not, that is her decision, not yours. If beauty were a person, she would soul shine so brightly that all other versions would orbit around her, the center of all light and energy, given freely so all things could live in harmony. If beauty were a person, she would be you, and you, and you. One continuous, spiraling, celestial spirit, an entire solar system of passions, mystery, freedom, vast expanse, raging storms, radiance, and courage, deftly defying any definitions of men. Thank you for listening. Thank you for encouraging my behavior. Thank you for being there for each other. I know I'm not the only one here who is alive today because spaces like this were available to us yesterday. So thank you for making the world a better place. Lord knows the world needs it right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Propaganda Poet. Great to have you on. It's really fun, and thanks for coming out for the slam this year. And you got to come back next year, obviously, to defend your title, too. So won't be seeing the last of you.
It was a fun event. And for those of you who missed it, come next year because it's awesome. You'll have a blast.
Awesome. Take care. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, that was Propaganda Poet, this year's Wrightwood Poetry Slam winner. Now, let's go to the open lines, as I mentioned. And the prompt for this week was to, here, we'll put it on the screen. Right, oops, not there. Right here, was to write a poem about a cultural myth you no longer believe in. And so here was my poem. This is a train poem style where I just kind of roll with it and see what comes out, having no idea where it's going to go. And this is the poem here. The truth is, I used to believe in its little silver hammer, tap-tapping against a wheel, listening for the hollow sound, tap-tapping into the roots of the tree to taste the sap, to peel back a thin skin from the soft, sweet fruit within, the potassium, magnesium, the whole of the periodic table on the tip of a pipette, measured in micrograms. If only we were smaller, if only it weren't so big, but we could cleave it, shrink it down to Planck's length, and look, if only for a nanosecond, at the dark shape swirling there. When you sliced open the frog, its belly was full of eggs, as if the whole of its body were a box to hold them in. Surprise, and how gently you scooped them with a dull end of the scalpel, set them aside 1,000 would-be tadpoles stalled by formaldehyde so you could pull back the flesh and pin with a flag every organ, each one with a name no frog ever knew. Is it the truth you threw up in a bucket, peeling back the layers of your lunch, a banana, a Diet Coke from the soda machine, put there for the pleasure of its sweetness, a mass spectrometer, bent beams of ionized light, adding up to something, some ratio, the known to the unknown, but every object viewed from every direction at once is always a sphere, a fuzzy ball of there and not there, edges blurred in clouds of probability, and that's what God must see as he spins omniscient everywhere at once, each thing a dark egg of potential energy caged by its thingness, and we blink through the bars of the instant and call out what we see to the class. That was my poem for the week. The truth is, let's see what everybody else has. And definitely we have 18 people on the call now, so definitely a one poem night. And we'll just go in order of people popping up. Carla Schwartz is next. Hey, Carla, how you doing tonight?
Can you hear me now?
I can. Hey, Carla, how you doing?
I am very good. I'm very good. What a great night so far. And I did a prompt poem, and it's pretty short, so it'll be good for you.
Sounds good.
And it's based on the myth that I had understood when I was a child, that if you keep digging far enough, you will end up in China.
Yeah.
And so this is called For the Soil All the Way to China. It's a tritina too, I think. Yeah, no, a triolate. Okay. No, tritina. Sorry, here we go. When I was 6, I knew that to dig and dig would eventually find me in China, halfway across the world, in big trouble, if when I was 6, I were to dig and dig. Not speaking Chinese, how would I ask for even a fig? Deep in my heart, I must have known better. When I'd grown older and began to dig, not the soil, but for knowledge to eventually find me in China.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, good turn there, Carla. Did you ended up in China?
I don't have to say that.
That's true.
Don't ever assume that what anybody writes is true, right?
I just like good stories, though. Anyway, thanks so much for sharing that, Carla. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Good night.
Yep, you too. That was Carla Schwartz with For the Soil All the Way to China. Next up is Katie Dozier.
Hey, Tim. The show is so amazing tonight.
Okay.
It's one of my all-time favorites, I think.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear. Yeah, Francesca's just great, and Wendy's great, and Propaganda Poet, who you know is really great too. So Katie was keeping the score at the Wrightwood Poetry Slam, trying to anyway.
Yeah, that was generous.
Yeah, and we had a thing where if Katie got the number wrong, we would give a free copy of Rattle to anybody who shouted it out first.
Yeah.
And we gave a few copies of Rattle away that night, but more poetry to more people, I always like to say. So anyway.
It was also a wine festival, I fear, bears mentioning.
That is true. It was the
That is
Wrightwood Arts and
accurate.
Wine Festival.
It was, yeah.
So what do you have that you'd like to share?
All right. Well, okay. So I missed the cultural part of the myth. So it's just a myth. So sorry about that.
Well, everything is
maybe.
culture, right? So I don't know if I was wondering if that word was redundant actually as I was typing it in.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Should have edited it out then.
Probably.
All right. So what I have is a sonnet, an American sonnet. So some don't call it a sonnet, but I adamantly do call it one. So,
Okay, let's hear it.
all right. Let me hold the door for you. With both of my hands pressed on the glass, your own hands too tied to clasp, the thread of a door clapping closed right on your only nose. I used to think time was a hinge, that doors open and shut on the heels of each second, as if I could simply grab a rag and Windex my way through the years. But even cracked glass can confuse a cardinal, and I can't stop opening all of these windows. Sometimes I forget to first pull up the blinds and the metal sails shuffle around like timelines, smacking the frame. I fly through and out and back in, and just like the wind, time curls from the cues with no end.
Yeah, great poem, great extended metaphor there. Let Me Hold the Door for You by Katie Dozier. Of course, I do the Poetry Space with Katie Dozier every Thursday afternoon as well on Twitter, which we're talking about with Francesca coming back to Twitter and other social media. It's not so bad, so come on back. but what are we talking about? It's the beats. We're going to be talking about the beats, which is not something that I know a whole lot about. I mean, I know some beat poems, but you know, I like Kerouac's haiku. I like Howl, but I don't know a lot about the beats. So maybe I'll learn something along the way. That's a Thursday at 3 p.m.
Yeah. And in the meantime, we'll work on our pitch beyond It's Not So Bad.
Yeah, we should work on that too. Well, thanks, Katie. Yeah, looking forward to that. Always a pleasure seeing you. Yep.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay, bye. That was Katie Dozier with Let Me Hold the Door for You. Next up, we have Zachary Honeycutt.
Hello. Hey, Tim.
Hey, Zachary, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing,
I'm
man?
doing great. It's been a fun night of poetry.
Yeah, loving it. So I really was looking forward to doing this poem that I wrote when I was 13 about trolls because I used to believe in trolls.
Oh, that's great.
And it's a traditional Zachary Honeycutt poem, but I cannot find the darn thing.
Uh-oh.
I know that I have it. So I'm gonna read, I brought some sci-fi poems. They're both short, but if you want me to, I'll read one.
Yeah, I think we got to stick to one because we have so many people on the call.
Okay.
So which one do you
So
want to
I'm
do?
gonna read Thunderbird. I've read this one before. This was one that I got published in Warp 10, but I really like the mythos of the Southwest, and I feel like this poem kind of encapsulates that, and that was the vibe I was going for. Um, so I'm gonna read Thunderbird.
All right, sounds good. Let's hear it.
Sonnet 17, Thunderbird. Deep in the desert, superstition thrives, inscribed on totem poles in arid lands, and on men's lips who in their daily lives notice structures built not by human hands. Lizards with no eyes lie dead in their strives to taste false black water or hear the chants. Hard truths passed down behind cheap motel dives, swallowed by Navajo, lizards by ants. Something in the atmosphere of dark drives them to bring to life, before the fire's death, the object of derision. Among clives, south of Moab, the subject of their breath. What left then took the metal obelisk? The Thunderbird? Maybe a flying disc.
Yeah, great closing couplet there. I always love a good formal science fiction poem, which so few people send to me except for you. Thanks, Zachary. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. Always a pleasure, Tim. See you guys next week.
Yep, take care. Zachary
Bye-bye.
Honeycutt with Sonnet 17, Thunderbird. Let's Mike Bales is next.
Great night. I still have to say that Francesca Bell's one of my favorites. I've gone back to Rattlecast 15 a few times with her.
Yeah, she's just great.
The way she describes human condition and describes some really disturbing things in beautiful language. It's great. It's unbeatable.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
I sent it to you last week in the Northland, but let's put it this way. There are things I wanted. These are things that my dad told me that I wanted to believe.
Uh-huh.
It's in Minnesota. In the Northland, my father said the lakes are so blue as he took me to a landmark north of St. Cloud. My father said, talk to Paul Bunyan and he'll say something back. The silent figure stood 26 feet tall and held an axe. My father said with a single swing, the giant could fell every tree in a forest. And I was enticed by magic found as pastures gave way to trees and lakes. Babe in ox colored blue stood shoulder to shoulder with Paul and looked at me. My father said each footstep of Babe created a lake, and Minnesota boasted 10,000. My father said when he took me to ELLE that all roads ended there, and I looked across boundless waters as if the world I knew ended there, too. My father said on the other side was Canada. My father took me to Lake Itasca, where the Mississippi started as a stream, and as it flowed to the Gulf, it learned to run true.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. And it's funny. I was walking the dog with my son, who's 8, and I asked him what myths he doesn't believe in anymore, thinking maybe like he'd say Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, but he said Paul Bunyan.
And it's amazing.
Yeah. He really believed in the Babe, the blue ox, and all that stuff. I think something stuck.
I wanted to believe it, and the incident that happened was I figured I saved my parents. I was standing near a fence of the buffalo, and the buffalo charged the fence, but didn't get me. That's my little moment when I jumped.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, have a good night. There's Mike Bales with In the Northland. Joe Cottonwood's up next.
Okay, I believe I'm on now.
You are. Hey, Joe, how you doing tonight?
Hi. I wrote to the prompt. I only saw the prompt this morning, so this is a rather raw, fresh poem.
Hot off the press. Love it.
And I don't know whether you're going to be showing what I sent you, but I've changed the ending since I sent it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll put this on screen, but we can hear the different ending. Yeah.
Okay. As soon as you said cultural myths, I think of celebrities, particularly dead celebrities, as cultural myths.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I went in my mind right away. And I guess everyone knows Elvis Presley, but the other celebrity in here is Walter Johnson, who was if you know baseball, that was he was one of the greatest pitchers of all time.
Yeah, the most wins of all time, I think, right?
Yep. And as it happened, my house where I grew up was built on a farm that once was owned by Walter Johnson.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
My little touch of fame, I guess. Anyway, it's part of this poem. So this poem is called Walter Johnson Fires a Fastball. Elvis Presley Crowds the Plate. You learn at a tender age how to glaze windows when you practice pitching tennis balls against the brick wall of your house. In your backyard, you learn and love how to throw sidearm and overhand, curveball and fast, knuckle and changeup. You learn to hate the mulberries that squish over the pitching mound, and you stomp the bamboo sprouts like little horns that pop up under your feet. You play with next door Myrna, and you love the Elvis songs blaring from your tinny transistor radio, as much as you hate the menacing hillbilly accent of Myrna's drunk father, who yodels, "Love me tender, love me true, ah-ooh, ah-ooh, ah-ooh," then screams at you for retrieving a ball on his weedy lawn. And you grow. You find that you can improve your arm only as far as your body will allow, that one fat pitch can erase 10 good ones, that there's always some batter with a better eye, some coach with a mean streak. You learn that mulberries make great pie, that songbirds roost in bamboo as if it were native to East Coast Maryland. You learn that your house was built on farmland formerly owned by Walter Johnson, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, and your mulberries fed his chickens. You develop hair down there and see Myrna burst into tears when you ask to see hers. You see Myrna launch a stone like a high-tight fastball, whizzing past your chin into the radio, playing Love Me Tender, smashing it to daggers of plastic. You learn Myrna hates Elvis, and she hates her dad for his pelvis, and she loves God instead. And you think maybe you love Myrna like Elvis loves his mama in a tender, non-sexual way. You learn Walter Johnson, after baseball, became an incompetent, small-time politician. And Elvis, in Vegas, turned hollow as bamboo. You learn the easy passage from genius to fool. Every star fades with the dawn. Yeah, remember the star. That's the change in the ending.
That's the change in the ending. Well, that's great. Thanks, Joe. That was a wonderful poem. Really took me back to playing baseball at that age as well. And wish I'd grown up on a farm like that. But very cool. Definitely it took us back.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was Joe Cottonwood with Walter Johnson Fires a Fastball. Elvis Presley Crowds the Plate. Thanks, Joe, for that. Next up is Sharon Ferrante.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Sharon. How are you tonight?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I love the interview with Francesca.
Yeah, she's just great.
Fabulous. And you know my heart was beating with Wendy. Okay.
Of course,
like,
yeah.
yeah. I was like so excited. I was like, ah. What a great show. Thank you so much. I did the prompt poem, but it's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
I just mixed up a few myths, in Tonka.
Well, it sounds fun to me.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you so much. So I'll share. Yeah, it was fun. I meet a shapeshifter I detest. She's wearing my long lost dress. Under the moon, a werewolf. His changes all lead to a bloody mess. Walking the edge of a lake, the lady pulling seaweed from her chest. From every forest, I want nothing more but to blend in, gallop a bit on a centaur.
Very cool. I love that. It was a great Tonka by Sharon Ferrante. Thanks so much, Sharon.
It was so much fun. Thank you. And what a wonderful show. I'm so loving it. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, that was great. And I always love good Tonka. And it reminds me of we had a fractured fairy tale haiku sequence in one issue of Rattle. If I'm going to go find it. But that was great. And next up, let's go to Michael Goldman.
Oh, I could write some more.
Yeah, you should share.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so, hey, Michael, how you doing today?
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, it's great to see you back. Of course, Michael was the guest a couple weeks ago, and I've always sort of hoped guests would pop in back for the open lines from time to time. Only a few have, so I really appreciate that you're here again.
Well, thanks a lot. And I really enjoyed talking to you last time. The prompt for this poem was being interviewed by you.
Okay. Let me, I have it right here. Okay.
Rattlecast, podcast of Rattle magazine for my father. I was watching a video about the left and right brain, and the presenter was talking about poetry, how it's able to say the unsayable, tap into an emotional or spiritual state that everyday language can't. Kind of like the way music can too, communicate directly, bypass the intellect. And I thought of my son who writes poetry, and just then the phone rang, and it was him, my son, the poet. And I told him what had happened, and I didn't know he had been thinking of calling me several times today to remind me he was being interviewed on a video podcast this evening. And he said, "This is poetry. All this, coincidences that make us scratch our heads and wonder what life is doing with us." And he brought up irony, how poetry is a way of exploring the inexplicable, the horrible, and the magnificent without blaming or congratulating ourselves too much. We can use poetry to be more authentic, he said, as the page reflects back just how deep we are, invested in this life, that no simple strategy works for long. We have to both take part and surrender, let it unfold without getting in the way. I'm going to watch my son tonight, see what else he has to say about poetry.
That was great. I've already been scolded for asking if it was true, but that is so cool to share that story and your father's voice. That's really neat. And another thing, I mean, the coincidences are intense. And I almost mentioned it, but forgot to, where Katie Dozier wrote about a bird flying into the window. And she told me that minutes later, a bird flew into her window. So, it is spooky and weird the way poetry works. It really is. And that line about how the universe is playing with us is a little too true, I think. It's happened to me many times. So thanks for sharing that.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Great show.
Yeah, well, come on, open lines anytime. Hope to see you again soon. Yeah, there's Michael Favala Goldman, I should say, with a Rattlecast podcast of Rattle magazine in the voice of his father. Let's go next to Carolyn Codd.
Hello.
Hi, Carolyn. How are you doing tonight?
Okay. I have a prompt poem. At first, the idea about myth didn't seem to interest me, but then one morning I woke up with an idea, and this is what I wrote.
It's pretty quiet. Can you get closer to the microphone? Is that possible?
Yeah. Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, let me see.
That better?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I call it judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple mythical questions. Which have more value, men or women? Black, brown, white, or other colored persons? LGBTQ or cis persons? Poor or wealthy persons? Citizens or immigrants? Jews, Christians, Muslims, or persons of any other or no religion? Asians or Africans, Asians, Australians, Europeans, or North or South Americans? Demythicizing, I found just one answer for all these queries. Not very poetic, but rather mathematical. The value of one person is equal to that of any other person.
That's great. Yeah, definitely an important reminder. And I love the mathematical precision of that ending. Thanks for sharing that, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that was Carolyn Codd with Judgment. Next up, we have Kevin Kane. I'm not sure if Kevin's been on before.
Kevin hasn't ever been on before.
Yeah,
I've never
great.
seen him before.
Well,
But,
excellent. I'm so glad he could join us. Where are you calling from?
New York City. I'm in the
Excellent.
Bronx.
Uh-huh.
In New York. But I've subscribed to Rattle for 3 or 4 years now, and so much of it I've enjoyed so much.
Well, thanks so much for saying
Really
that. It's great to have you on to share some
stuff.
poems.
Well, I saw the prompt this morning and pulled out a poem that I had written a while ago,
Mhm.
and it's about the church that I grew up in, and I hate to refer to it as a myth because my mother is yet among the living, but I kind of do, and I have a poem called "An Occasional Mass."
Yeah, all right. Well, I have it here. Let's hear it.
Not a word do I hear there that I believe is true. No, not a word, and yet I don't forget or want to lose what little faith I do have left, however loosely set in stone. In the beginning, there was the Word, or so they say, and I can't help but wonder then what that word might have been, and what it might mean to those of us standing and sitting and kneeling and then standing again. They tell us just that the word was there and that it was good, and the first one of its race. Well, why not good? What else could it have been but good, just for having been there in the first place? After all, a pig that can sing needn't sing awfully well to make a sound worth hearing. It's that the pig can sing at all that we celebrate. Though let me add right here one thing. I never have heard of a pig that could sing, which brings to mind what they also have been heard to say, which is this: blessed is he who believes in what he hasn't heard and can't see. To which I just said this morning at Mass, amen, and as it is now and ever shall be. But what I can't ever really seem to fathom is how these nuggets of uncommon wisdom apply to me, still attending an occasional Mass and still finding some solace there. Faith of our fathers, or I don't know and I don't care. I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah, great poem, great honesty there, and beautiful sounds too. An occasional mass. Kevin Kane, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I'm having a really good time.
Yeah, hope to see you again. Yeah, it's every Monday night, so pop back on anytime you can.
Good.
Thanks. That was Kevin Kane once again with An Occasional Mass. Next, we have Mark Grinier.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Mark. How's it going?
Oh, pretty good. This one was not exactly written for the prompt, and I'm not sure freedom is a cultural myth, but I thought it seemed appropriate, so this is the poem I'll read.
Yeah, well, free
It's
will.
called Freedom.
Yeah, let's hear it. Okay.
And it's got an epigraph, just another word for nothing left to lose, from me and Bobby McGee by Chris Christopherson. Everything's lost, tangled up in blue, like a modern warbler warbling, or a radio out of tune, tuning into toady croaks, discordant noises sung out loud, not progress, not blessed unrest, not silence, but studious avoidance of aliens and tsunamis, speeding toward death, freedom's place, sunk in the swamps in which old prejudice floats, white northern depths de-iced from which time steals great chunks of truth off melting icebergs, floating south, taking what little time or place we have left for big lie politics, for sipping low-key melodies, discordant cowboy songs sung slow and sweet through drooping nights by fat white voices falling from historic heights, birds winging through long windless days past sweet chariots betrayed by myths, by freedom's fall to earth from failed Icarian wings, melted into blobs of wax, beeswax left behind in empty hives, by bees made free with nothing left to lose.
Great ending there. Talking about sticking the landing there, sneaking that in at the end. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. It was great.
Thank you.
Yep. That was Mark Grenier once again with Freedom. Thanks, Mark. A pleasure as always. Dick Westheimer is up next.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick. How you doing tonight?
Good. I mean, what to a mini interview and a long interview. And of course, you've been regaled with how much people enjoyed this. So I'll just let you assume that I did also.
Yeah, it's safe to assume. But thanks for saying so.
Yeah. I wrote Francesca a little note about how, like, you know, I've never really completely lost the thread writing poetry, felt like bereft of any poetic impulse. But last week I did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange feeling, I can say. But I did submit a Poets Respond poem, but actually I'm going to share with you one that I didn't submit that was a Poets Respond poem. It's the one I sent in the prompt piece because it's short and it has the line "stick the landing," which has been said so many times tonight that I thought that I would share it.
Yeah.
And the title explains what the news story was.
Okay.
Wherein the poet identifies with the moon lander that crashed and broke into pieces. That poem I wrote last night after our fight, where you tried so hard to find a way out, and I failed to stick the landing.
Oh, yeah, great little metaphor there. Thanks for sharing that. And definitely, so you wrote that this week?
I wrote that last week. And like lost it in my sort of like pages of failed starts and forgot to submit it as a little.
Well, that is so funny. Talk about what Michael Goldman was talking about with just the poems. I don't know. They generate something weird about the universe, winking at us all the time. Because we did use the phrase "stick the landing." I could Google later through the transcript and see how many times, but it was a lot. So very funny that you did that. Thanks for sharing it, Dick.
Thanks, Tim. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye. There's a Dick Westheimer with "Wherein the poet identifies with the moon lander that crashed and broke into pieces." Something we can all relate to as well. Let's go next. Who is next? Jayanthi is here, but I think the sound is not turned on yet again, like it was last week, Jayanthi, so you got to do it again, whatever that was. Let's go to Jennifer Elise Wang.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Jennifer, how you doing?
I'm good. It's been a while, so I wasn't able to do a prompt, but I decided
I saw
to
what was it? You were sticking the landing that we in the surfing. What was it that they called it?
Yeah,
I saw
it's
you
called
say
a claim.
A claim.
And
I
so,
love that.
and ever since I learned about it, you see it, and it's actually hilarious because regardless of how well they do, the Brazilians actually practice it, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I did it," and that's to sell that they did what they wanted.
Very cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard that at all, so I always love learning something new. So what do you have to share? What poem?
So this was a recently published piece. I actually had two published in this journal, Vesivia. One was one of another Rattle prompt poem when we did the eulogy. So, but I'm sharing the other one. And the theme was cyberspace, and it kind of fit that we wound up talking about social media being toxic, because this was inspired by some nasty things said to me, and then my response. So this poem is a little nasty as a content warning. And so this is the comments section.
Okay.
Once a guy, a stranger on the internet, told me that a tampon should be shoved in my mouth, all because I stood up against creepers who assume the guys have heroes. Funny how cishet men suddenly overcome their irrational fear of menstruation products, open or wrapped, when it can be used as a weapon for the patriarchy. Never mind that we have to pay taxes to take care of our bodies. Only they can talk about our bodies and our periods and how those hormones make us all irrational. The same guy said I must have woken up on the wrong side of the tampon, and in the same thread got grossed out when I said, I free bleed, baby. We can't mention our own blood because women and trans folks aren't real, breathing, bleeding people with emotions and needs. Thus, if I say a tampon in my mouth sounds kinky, the one who suggested it would be grossed out again because he doesn't want to hear about queer sex and female pleasure. I'm tempted to add that it's kinky, but I'm a dom, so it should go into his mouth, and I can see him seethe with rage through the wireless network. Instead, I think about how a tampon in my mouth wouldn't even stop the bleeding from all the times I've had to bite my tongue and still my fingers from forming a fist, nails digging into my palm. And yet, it makes me feel better to show some teeth when I'm told you should smile more.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The comment section is a place to avoid. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jennifer. It's always a pleasure hearing your work.
Hey, thank you.
Yep, take care. Yeah, that was Jennifer Elise Wang with the comment section, which definitely, I can't remember the last time I stuck a toe in the comment section because it never goes well. Thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. Next up is Jayanthi Rangan. Hey, Jayanthi. It was working now.
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, how are you
I
tonight?
want to show you this.
Oh, wow.
This guy boy.
Oh, that's very, yeah, it's the same, as I have behind me.
It's funny of how many statues there are in the world. That's the one.
It is.
Okay, so here is the poem. It says, exercise during pregnancy. The runner scooted from the town, or so it seemed, in her sneakers, made for taking the wing. One moment at the threshold, and then nowhere, in her blue block color jersey and a headband. Some townies envied her will to break free. Some said, running is bad for pregnancies. She should be stopped. I wanted baby so bad. I erred. I stayed away from her sway, aloof. We don't know why the athlete didn't return. Was her womb vacated before the due date? Did her cradle's load-bearing walls crumble with stress fractures? Exercise taboo grew for women. Controls rolled in, and the females lost big time. Neighbors and clergy believed in curbs and checks. That winter, the Arctic cold front stayed thick, fear rampant in every uterus, and we grew into pumpkins, rooted and seedy.
Oh, very interesting poem, The Myth of Exercise. Thanks for sharing that, Jayanthi.
Thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
The Myth of Exercise by Jayanthi Rangan. Next, we have Kashiana Singh.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Kasia. Speaking of former guests who've come back for the open lines, you were one of the people I was referring to, so it's good to see you back again.
Yes.
So what do you have to share with us tonight?
What an evening. I'm one of those who've got Francesca's bookmarked, and I keep going back to that very often. So thank you for bringing that back again.
Oh, great.
I have a recent poem. I have a haiku for the prompt. If it's okay, I can do that, and then my poem. Otherwise, I'll just do.
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, haiku we can do a haiku plus an extra poem. Yeah.
Okay, so the haiku is on the prompt, the myth prompt, and here's how I'll read it first, and then I can tell you about it.
Okay.
Bleeding Devi, her Shiva waits in sanctum. Bleeding Devi, her Shiva waits in sanctum. I'll post a link. It's about a very famous temple in the south of India where there were a lot of protests about women or girls in the menstruating age not allowed to enter the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. because it would have depurified the deity in the temple. However, right a few kilometers away from that temple is actually another temple where there is a whole celebration that occurs around the bleeding of a woman.
Oh, wow.
So that's where this came.
Say it one more time so it's not, we know the context.
I will repeat it one more time. Bleeding Devi, her Shiva waits in sanctum. Bleeding Devi, her Shiva waits in sanctum.
Yeah, great haiku. Yeah, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And then
thank you.
And then you have Catalog of Frozen Memories is the other poem I have.
Yes. I did not realize that it had been published, but it just came out in the Stone Poetry Quarterly.
Oh, cool.
Catalog of Frozen Memories. We don't mourn the loss of broken glass. It settles into a million stars, shards even, while we watch a red moon rise above us. We don't mourn distance, absence of words. Our pauses are line breaks that help adjust to the temporality of life inside of found poems. We don't mourn the loss of our own clarity, arguments about where the bag of cherries lost itself, finding pits swirling in the washer. We don't mourn shifting demands of food from sticky, smudgy, muddy brownies, now a stubborn ask for boiled eggs, runny yolks. We don't mourn that our mornings change shape from watching sparrows filling bird feeders to neglected bird shit, unmade beds. We don't mourn violence, neither our own nor bloody violence of lands, dogs in wars. We fall asleep, heads dangling, static of TV. We don't mourn how we are losing ease of a kiss, touch of skins, lack the spark we had, our eyes squint at any sign of joyousness. We don't mourn missing curiosity, nibbling at teaching moments like a flighty squirrel. Our ritual is limited to filing doctor's receipts. We don't mourn the weather, questions, repetitive chores we argue about, linger like watering succulents, nearly bone dry. We don't mourn farewells anymore. Facts and data is a junkyard inside foggy brains. We measure days with erased tally marks. We don't mourn our own lost recognition. If either is dead, date etched on the plaque, the other will sing, unafraid of lost breaths.
That's great. Another poem that sticks the landing, and great use of the repetition there too. Catalog of Frozen Memories. Thanks so much for sharing that, Kashiana.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, always great to see you. Thanks. It's Kashiana Singh with a haiku and then Catalog of Frozen Memories. Nate Jacob is up next.
Good evening.
Ahoy, Nate. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the pirate's greeting.
Actually, I was just thinking about how that used to be the original. Instead of like hello, you're supposed to say ahoy for the whoever the early adopter of the phone wanted that. So I should say ahoy every once in a while, but it seemed appropriate. So, so what do you got for us tonight?
Hey, I've got a prompt poem written in between two naps this afternoon.
Oh, that means you were tired though. So
it means something. We'll find out.
It definitely does. Okay, let's hear it.
It's based on the myth that we only use 10% of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess expectations are higher for some of us now. Use your brain. A brain 10% in use seemed a decent excuse to dismiss the expectation that I could somehow function at a higher level. I'm just fine. After all, I really thought I had always been taught that improvement was vain for a man with a brain running lazy such as mine. The world had made some sense. Hey, I had some intelligence and performed well enough by using some of the gray stuff between these ears of mine. But the myths were all wrong, and it didn't take long for this loafing brain to excuse itself, to feign offense, then to whine about moving the goalposts and who had made the most of the fullness of their smarts. I made use of the parts that made sense at the time. Turns out I could have used it all along, for as much for the banal things I'd done, mostly mindless, as for the brilliant and genius things like old Albert Einstein. We all use 100% of our brains like nature meant. Perhaps we could do even better if we put our heads together, make the world a little more kind.
Oh, that was great. You should send that to Melissa Balmain over at Light. I think she would enjoy that. Use your brain. That's perfect.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Nate Jacob with Use Your Brain. A couple more people left on the lines. We have Angela Gardner's here. Hey, Angela.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to see you. Haven't been around as much the last couple weeks. Good to see you.
Yeah, I've been moving. I finished I finished teaching college, so it's been a little crazy.
Busy times. Well, the truth is, if I were not hosting the Rattlecast, I probably would have skipped the last couple of weeks too, between the festival and moving myself to this new place. So what do you have to share for us?
Well, and it's crazy, May. You have kids like me, and everything. They put everything at these end of the weeks.
Yeah. Every night we had the choir, we had the theater, we had the little league thing, we had the plays. So yeah, every night we had kid stuff going on too.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
It's so funny because as much as I'm busy, I always make time to write a poem for Rattle every single week. So it's funny for Poets Respond. And I just have two from the last couple weeks. One is really short. It's a haiku.
Yeah, we already got the haiku in, so you can do two for sure. We've established that precedent.
It's a really short haiku. Yeah. And I mean, just a quick thing. It's just about well, I'll say what it's about after maybe.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Identifiable sounds in the crust. The noise makes us pause. Listen for its rapid pop. What direction? Run. And I wrote that after the mass shooting at the mall in Texas. So I was just thinking the crust is the earth that we one of the layers that we have. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then the other poem is I'm always, I always have on my mind about the book bans that are going on and some of the things that are going on in the States where the libraries are closing down and that kind of things like that going on. So I love Fahrenheit 451. So I was just kind of thinking about this and I reread it that week and I was like, hey, and so I just, it's kind of after this, I feel the fire has started. So,
yeah.
So I'll read it when you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead. It's already up.
Okay. The fire has started. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing. Montag to his wife Mildred in novel Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The pages make a loud thud. When you shut it hard, it's over. I feel the story's puzzle pieces fit within my head. The sweet buzz and then sadness. I was lost for days in it. The book returned to its home. Did you find it on the shelf? Has it wandered away? Has someone nibbled the edges? I remember how it bends and folds in the corners. Is it in a metal cart under others to be burned? It's safe now. It's safe for now, as long as I keep it from being charred.
Yeah, interesting from the fire started, and definitely I haven't read Fahrenheit 451 in so long. Maybe I should read it again because I've done 1984 many times, but I haven't read that since I was a teenager. Thanks for sharing that, Angela, and congratulations on having the poem in the new issue of Rattle too. So
I know.
Yeah, all print subscribers can check that out. Should have arrived right around now or the next day or two if it hasn't yet. So excellent poem. Love that one. Really moving. Glad we could share it in print.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I got my copy, and but yeah, it's a great book, and I'm just honored to be amongst all these other awesome poets in that book. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much. It was a pleasure having you in there. Thanks, Angela.
A pleasure. Have a great night.
Yep, you too.
Thanks. Bye.
Angela Gardner with 2 poems, Identifiable Sounds in the Crust and The Fire Has Started. Let's see. Stephen Horrell is next. And we have 2 more people left. Yep, 2 more people left, and Steve is next.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. How you doing? Oh, wait, maybe it's not Steve Horrell. Is it Steve Horrell?
Yes, it is indeed.
Okay.
I can't get my camera to work. Anyway, I sent you 2 poems. And I think I was a bit overcome by the presentation, and I love the fact that she doesn't have an MFA, because I I always feel a bit left out and a bit whatever.
Yeah, well, one of the things we talked about, I think in the last time, or maybe the interview, I've done 3 interviews with Francesca, so I'm not sure which, but she talked about how she always felt really bad about it and left out too, because she doesn't have one, until she actually edited a magazine, because she would see, all in the bios in the back, everyone having MFA. Then she realized, looking at the submissions, that just all the submissions do, because MFAs are a dime a dozen, and so everybody has one. But it really doesn't make a difference on the submission, she said, and it's true, it really doesn't. So don't feel bad about that ever.
I did listen to her first interview. I tracked down the early Rattle one, so I was quite excited
oh, that's great.
to hear this one. Yeah. So I sent you 2 poems, and I will read one. It can be the one of your choice. I only sent you this Oyster Chuckers one because you play ball.
I do. Yeah, definitely. I love playing
well,
ball.
maybe we'll just read the light one tonight.
Okay, sure.
I'll read the Oyster Chuckers.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. How much like chameleons we live. We put on baseball uniforms. We are a team. We pit our skills, usually our lack of, against other teams. We try to compete and have fun. We try to have fun and compete. Sometimes we don't give a shit. Just seems important to move our bodies, feel the parts work to a strange and strict rhythm, watching the parts not work. A ball spins out of an open glove. A ball thrown over the backstop, executing a perfect slide where there is no base. We all put on different threads for different jobs. Welder, teachers, loggers, falling and landing bucker, cabinet maker, real estate salesman, tree planter, farmer, siding applicator, parks board employee, singer and songwriter, the smoking marathon runner, the incredible laughing gas monster, the physiotherapist, sports doctor. Our home is the fisherman's on the Oyster River. The scorekeepers chose the itty bitty titty club t-shirts, not our t-shirts. Ours say Oyster Chuckers, showing a gangly moron chucking an oyster. You have to be a bit crazy to like our t-shirts. We all like them.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And it does describe our Sunday softball league to a T. So that is perfect. Except I never throw the ball over the backstop, I have to say. Errors are rare.
No. Well, perhaps you were the pitcher.
Yeah, that was great though. That is how it goes. We are the lucky strike for some reason, and most of the names are definitely slightly pornographic puns.
Well, the Fisherman's Bar is on the Oyster River. Anyway, Meditations on the Oyster River is another story, but anyway, that's why we were called the Oyster Chuckers.
Well, that's great. I love it. Thanks so much for sharing that, Steve.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, take care.
Take care, yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye. Yeah, that was Steve Farrell with Oyster Chuckers. I love that. Thanks for sharing it, Steve. And then we have Lucy Chow as the last one up. I think we're going to only have the Zoom, so I think anybody who didn't get your poems to, I can't read any extra today, but here's Lucy. Hey, Lucy, how you doing?
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, good to have you on again. So what do you have to share with us tonight?
I have a prompt poem, but I have also an extra one, because I took your challenge to write in this amazing form in the Sudoku.
Yeah, the Sudoku, that's Kat Lehman's from Friday. So good job putting one together. Another 5x5. Apparently she does, she'll do 3x3 or 4x4 and occasionally 5x5. So it's really interesting to see this. Yeah, why don't you, do you have have an idea of reading it? For people who are, only listening, this is, it follows Sudoku, which is the math puzzle game where you sort of fill in a sort of grid with numbers. And but then Kat Lehman puts haiku in there, so they end up being these interwoven haiku where they're like at least 10, but sometimes diagonal too. There's so many haiku you can read off of this grid that she calls Sudoku. So do you want to do that one?
Yeah, I think I'll read the Sudoku. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's hear it.
Mine is not by far not as good as Kat's, but I think I have at least a vague glimmer of this sort of tessellated grid of images and scenes. So let's see what we get.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Black swan lifting up her sturdy, steely gray webbed feet. On Stone Island, cabbage leaves, butter yellow ducklings patter. Cradling a calm family flock of fur in rippling celadon. Sepia wades into rainy lake-like inkwell. Mirror flowering acacias, soundless swims becalmed when rain breaks. Black swan on Stone Island, cradling a calm sepia mirror. Lifting up cabbage leaves, family wades into flowering acacias. Her sturdy, butter yellow flock of fur, rainy, soundless swims. Steely gray ducklings in rippling lake light becalmed. Webbed feet patter celadon inkwell when rain breaks.
Oh, that was beautiful. I mean, my favorite is the Black Swan on Stone Island cradling a calm sepia mirror. But those are all great, the way those are interwoven. Was it? How long did it take that to do that, Lucy? Was it really difficult?
Actually, it was interesting because the first afternoon I was taking a casual walk around a pond in rain, and it was peaceful, and I was not thinking about anything, just living in the moment and daydreaming. And the second day it was this small hours, 3 or 4 in the morning. I was awake, lying on my bed, and then I just took out my laptop and started filling words into this 5x5 grid, and I guess it was finished in less than 30 minutes. So perhaps I was dictating from some dream. I don't know.
Well, that's very cool. Thanks so much for sharing that, Lucy. And we only have time for the one poem. Got to wrap up the show, but thanks for sharing that. That was just great. I loved seeing a few people tried it out, and it was really neat to see.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep. Take care. See you next week, Hope. Bye.
See you.
Yeah, that was Lucy Chow with a Sudoku. We have one last person who just popped on, and then we'll wrap up the show. It says Tito Titus. Are you there, Tito? I'm looking for a poem if you sent one and not seeing it. Are you there? Maybe not. Okay.
Oh,
here
I'm
we go.
just watching.
Who is it?
Yeah.
Well, hello, Tito. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
I'm just listening and enjoying, that's all.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Glad you are. If you're just listening, you can do so always on YouTube or Facebook are the two places to do that. There's no need to come on the Zoom unless you got a poem to share. But I appreciate you being here and listening. Thanks so much for joining in.
Okay, you bet.
Yep, take care. That was Tito. So that's going to wrap up the show for today, and we're right at our 2.5 hour mark, so that's perfect. Let me really quickly do the Sciku for this week. And the Sciku is inspired by this story, which I find this too good to be true. So I don't know if it is. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's what my daddy always taught me. But we'll see. This is an article from the University of Massachusetts, and they always make these things so huge that they're hard to capture on a screen. But I think it says everything's designed for a phone these days. But new green technology from UMass Amherst generates electricity out of thin air. Renewable device could help mitigate climate change and power medical devices. So what they do is they basically take these nanoscale. Let me put these on here. These little nanoscale holes. I think they're 10 or 100 nanometers wide, and they put it through a membrane. And then as humid air passes through that membrane, it generates electrical current in the same way that the clouds create electricity, because they're so polarized. Each molecule has a charge, and one they bounce off the top more than the other, which creates a differential, and then and it creates a current. And they say that it'll possibly make it so you can have wearable, no need for batteries in a smartphone, or no need to charge a smartphone. It'll just be charged through the humidity in the air. Wearable electronics, things like that. No need for recharging a watch or anything like that. They'll always just have this way of generating, and you can stack them to even make potentially big power sources out of this. It sounds too good to be true to me, but I've been around the block a few times, seen some of these claims before, but it's possible. It'd be fascinating if it were true, and really save a lot of things in the world. So they talked about too making paint using this, and so which we'll see. It'd be really cool. But the Sciku that inspired is right here. Electricity, living in the air you breathe. Electricity, living in the air you breathe. That is the Sciku for the week, and that is the show for the week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It really has been a great one. Love it when the open lines are full like this, and we have trouble cramming it into the limit I put myself on before I go eat dinner. That's great. Next week's prompt is going to be the following. This is inspired by... I was really thinking about what is the poem? The poem that I posted on social media by Francesca Bell. Use extended metaphor. The title of that poem is, I'm drawing a blank right now. The title of that poem was Where We Are Most Tender. That's what I was thinking of. But use an extended metaphor for marriage as a hike. This is the prompt. Write about a personal relationship using extended metaphor throughout the entire poem. That is your prompt for next week. Just a simple, make an extended metaphor into a poem. Next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Sean R. Jones. So Sean, I think we nominated her poem from last summer's issue for a Pushcart Prize. She's a wonderful poet. Her new book is Date of Birth. That'll be Rattlecast number 197. We'll get to meet and learn more about Sean Jones. That is Monday, June 5th. That prompt, once again, is to write about a personal relationship using extended metaphor throughout the entire poem. And so we'll get your poems on that or anything else you want to share on the open lines. Once again, Monday, May 5th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I'll talk to you later. Good night.